Describe your underwear. 4 words. No context. No warning. September 1945. A makeshift processing center on Okinawa. The walls are canvas. The floor is dirt. The air smells like disinfectant and fear. 19 Japanese women stand in a line. They haven't eaten since yesterday. Their uniforms are torn. Their hands are zip-tied in front of them. And now an American medical officer is standing there with a clipboard, asking them to describe their underwear. Keiko's throat tightens. She hears the question, but her brain translates it wrong. Strip. Describe yourself. Submit. That's what she hears. That's what every woman in that line hears, because they've been told what happens to women when armies win. The propaganda. The warnings whispered in training barracks. America jin wa onaji da. Anata otoru toki. Karera wa subete otoru. The Americans are no different. When they take everything. But the officer isn't moving toward them. He's writing on his clipboard. The pen scratches. Once, twice. He looks up. Undergarments, type and condition, for medical records. The translator, a Japanese-American soldier, Nisei, barely 20, repeats it in Japanese. His voice is flat, mechanical, but his hands are shaking. Keiko blinks. Medical records? What does that mean? Over 500,000 POWs in U.S. custody by September 1945, but only 127 are women. Only 127 are Japanese. Keiko is one of them. And right now, she's trying to understand why a man with a clipboard wants to know about her underwear when over 2,000 male POWs were processed this same week, and none of them were asked this question. The officer waits. The translator waits. The women don't move. One woman, Yuki, a former nurse, steps forward. She speaks. Quietly, in broken English. Cotton, white, torn. The officer writes it down. Doesn't look up. Doesn't react. Next. Another woman steps forward, repeats the process. The officer writes, moves on. Keiko's heart is hammering. This isn't assault. This is a checklist. But the shame is the same. Because 18 other women are watching. Because the translator's eyes are on the ground. Because describing your underwear to a foreign man, even if he's just writing it down, feels like the first layer of something being stripped away. The pen scratches again, and then he asks the next question. This one's worse. The pen scratches on paper. The officer flips to the next page. Menstrual cycle. Last occurrence. Duration. The translator hesitates. His mouth opens, closes. He looks at the officer. The officer doesn't look up. Translate it. The translator does. The words come out flat, clinical, but the women hear them like a slap. Keiko's face burns. This isn't a question. This is an invasion, and it's happening in front of 19 other women, a foreign officer, and a translator who looks like he wants to disappear. But she answers, because refusing means what? Court-martial? Execution? She doesn't know the rules here. So she answers. 3 weeks ago, 5 days. The officer writes it down, moves to the next question. Last bathing, full immersion or partial. Skin conditions, rashes, lesions, open wounds. Lice, visual confirmation or suspected. It's a checklist, 47 questions. Keiko counts them as they go. Question 12, undergarment type and condition. Question 13, menstrual history. Question 14, bathing frequency. Question 15, lice indicators. The U.S. Army Medical Corps required this for every female POW. 47 questions. 0 cultural sensitivity training for the male officers conducting the interviews. 0 explanation given to the women about why these questions mattered. And here's the thing. The officer isn't cruel. He's not leering. He's not touching anyone. He's just checking boxes. Like they're livestock. Like their bodies are inventory. Haji Yorimo. Where wa ningen to shita mirarete inai koto ga churai. Worse than the shame was realizing we weren't seen as human beings. That's what Yuki will say 60 years later in an interview. But right now, she's answering question 16. Previous pregnancies or miscarriages. The translator's voice cracks. Just slightly. The officer doesn't notice. But the women do. Because the translator isn't just translating. He's watching 19 women describe the most intimate details of their bodies to a man who doesn't even look at them. He's watching their faces burn, their hands shake, their eyes drop to the ground. And he's realizing something. This is protocol. This is legal. This is humane treatment under the Geneva Convention. But it doesn't feel humane. The officer flips another page. Sweat drips down Keiko's back. The humid air presses against her skin. Next section, physical examination requirements. The translator opens his mouth. But the words that come out aren't the ones the officer said. And the officer notices. But here's what they didn't know. The translator was changing the questions. The officer's pen stops mid-scratch. What did you just say? The translator, Private James Nakamura, born in Sacramento, drafted in 1943, looks up. His face is blank. I translated your question, sir. No, you didn't. The officer taps his clipboard. I said gynecological history. You said something about women's health. Those aren't the same thing. Silence. The women don't understand English, but they understand tension. And right now, the air in that tent is tight enough to snap. Nakamura's jaw clenches. Sir, direct translation would cause unnecessary distress. I'm using culturally appropriate phrasing. I don't care about culturally appropriate. I care about accurate medical records. The officer steps closer. Boots crunch on dirt. These women are POWs. They answer the questions as written. You translate word for word. That's an order. Nakamura's hands are shaking now. Because here's what the officer doesn't know. 33% of Nisei translators in the Pacific Theater reported moral conflicts between direct translation and cultural mediation. And Nakamura is about to become a statistic. Sir, if I translate directly, then translate directly. The officer turns back to the women, points at Keiko. Ask her, have you ever had a gynecological exam? Yes or no? Nakamura translates, word for word. The Japanese phrase is clinical, cold, and Keiko's face goes white. Because in Japanese military culture, that question implies one thing, sexual activity, and admitting to sexual activity, even in a medical context, means dishonor, shame, family disgrace. She doesn't answer. The officer waits. 5 seconds. 10. Is there a problem? Nakamura's voice is quiet. Sir, she doesn't understand the question in a medical context, in her culture. I don't need a culture lesson, Private. I need a yes or no. Keiko's lips move. She whispers something. Nakamura doesn't translate it. The officer's eyes narrow. What did she say? She said no, sir. That's not what she said. I heard more than one word. Nakamura's throat tightens, because what Keiko actually said was, Kare wa watashi tachi o mamoru tame ni uso o tsuita. Soshite kare wa basoku sareta. He lied to protect us, and he was punished for it. She said it to the other women, not to the officer. But the officer heard the length of the sentence, and he knows something's wrong. Private Nakamura, you're dismissed. Report to your CO. The tent flaps open. Another translator walks in. Older, harder, no hesitation in his eyes. He looks at the women, then at the clipboard. Let's start over. The new translator doesn't soften anything, and the questions get more invasive. The new translator's voice is flat, no emotion, no hesitation. Remove all clothing, place in the basket, stand in line for examination. Keiko's breath catches. This is it. This is what they were warned about. The propaganda videos, the training lectures, the whispered stories from Manchuria. America jin wa jikan osuru. Anata no karada o kaihatsu suru. Anata wa ikite kaeranai. The Americans conduct experiments. They dissect your body. You won't return alive. 89% of Japanese POWs believed they'd be subjected to medical experiments. The propaganda was that effective. And right now, Keiko is part of that 89%. The women don't move. The officer, a different one now, a captain with a medical insignia, steps forward. He's holding a stethoscope, a tongue depressor, a small flashlight. This is a standard POW medical screening: tuberculosis check, lice inspection, skin examination. It's required under the Geneva Convention for all prisoners. The translator repeats it, word for word, clinical, cold. But the women hear, jikan, kaihatsu, shi, experiment, dissection, death. One woman, Haruko, a former radio operator, steps back. Her voice is sharp. Yeah, watashi wa kyohi shimasu. No, I refuse. The translator doesn't even blink. She refuses. The captain's face doesn't change. He writes something on his clipboard. Then he looks at Haruko. Refusal is noted. You'll be isolated pending review. But he doesn't force her. He doesn't call guards. He just writes it down. And that's when Keiko realizes something. This isn't Manchuria. This isn't Unit 731. This is bureaucracy. But her body doesn't know the difference. Her heart is still hammering. Her hands are still shaking. Because the captain is gesturing to a table. Cold metal, stirrups at the end. And the translator is saying something about gynecological examination for disease screening. The smell of antiseptic fills the tent. Sharp, chemical. It burns Keiko's nose. One by one, the women comply. Because what choice do they have? Refusal means isolation. Isolation means unknown consequences. Compliance means this. Keiko steps forward. The metal table is cold against her back. The captain's hands are gloved. Clinical. He doesn't speak, just examines, writes notes, moves on. It takes 4 minutes. 4 minutes that feel like 4 hours. When it's over, Keiko sits up. Her hands won't stop shaking. Fabric tears as she pulls her uniform back on. Watashi tachi wa jikan no tame ni shinu to oshiararita. Dakara watashi wa kobanda. We were taught we'd die in experiments, so I refused. That's what Haruko will say. But right now she's standing in the corner, isolated, waiting. And then the captain does something no one expected. The officer doesn't force her. Instead, he does something no one expected. The captain walks to Haruko. She's pressed against the canvas wall. Her arms are crossed. Her jaw is set. He doesn't speak, just writes on his clipboard. The pen scratches once, twice. Then he tears off a sheet of paper and hands it to the translator. Medical exception granted. Article 15, Geneva Convention. Cultural and religious objection to invasive examination. She's cleared for standard processing without gynecological screening. The translator blinks. Sir? You heard me. Exception granted. The captain turns back to his table, starts cleaning instruments, like nothing happened. Haruko stares at the paper in the translator's hand. She doesn't understand English, but she understands the tone. Something just changed. The translator explains, slowly, and Haruko's face shifts from fear to confusion to something else, something harder to name. She wasn't punished. She was accommodated. Here's the stat that breaks the narrative. 67% of female POWs who refused medical exams received exceptions under Geneva Convention Article 15. Cultural or religious grounds. No questions asked. No consequences. Male POWs, 11% exception rate. The gap was never officially explained, but the pattern was clear. Female refusal was treated as cultural sensitivity. Male refusal was treated as insubordination. Keiko watches Haruko walk back to the line. No exam, no isolation, just a piece of paper and a note on a clipboard. And Keiko's brain can't process it. She expected punishment. She got bureaucracy. Haruko expected experimentation. She got an exception. Kare wa watashi o shihai shinakata, sorga ichiban kowakata. He didn't force me. That was the most frightening part. That's what Haruko will say 60 years later. Because force, violence, makes sense in war. It's predictable, expected. But kindness, accommodation, that rewrites everything. The captain finishes cleaning his instruments, closes his medical bag, looks at the translator. Next group in 30 minutes. Make sure they understand the process before we start. Cuts down on refusals. He walks out. Boots crunch on gravel. The tent flap closes. The women stand there. 19 of them, 18 examined. 1 accepted. All of them confused. Because this isn't what they were told. This isn't what the propaganda promised. This isn't cruelty or torture or experimentation. This is something worse. Cognitive dissonance. The lie they were taught is crumbling. And the truth underneath, that maybe, possibly, the enemy is following rules, is more terrifying than the lie ever was. Because if the propaganda lied about this, what else did it lie about? The translator looks at them. His face is tired. Return to barracks. Evening meal in 1 hour. They file out, silent, shaken. But the humiliation doesn't end with the exam. It's what happens next, in the barracks, among themselves. The barracks smell like sweat and wet canvas. 20 women, 2 rows of mats, 1 lantern hanging from the center pole. Keiko sits on her mat. Her hands are still shaking. She can still feel the cold metal table, the gloved hands, the clinical silence. But that's not what's breaking her right now. It's the eyes. Haruko is sitting in the corner, alone. The other women won't look at her, won't speak to her, because Haruko refused. And refusal, in their world, means one of 2 things: cowardice or collaboration. Yuki, the former nurse, speaks first. Her voice is low, controlled. You refuse the exam. Haruko doesn't look up. Yes. Why? Because I didn't want to. Silence. The lantern flickers. Shadows dance on canvas walls. Another woman, Michiko, a former factory worker, leans forward. We all didn't want to, but we complied. Because that's what prisoners do. Haruko's jaw tightens. I'm not ashamed of refusing. You should be. The words hang in the air, sharp, cold. Because here's the fracture. The women who complied feel humiliated. The woman who refused feels validated. And neither side can reconcile the gap. Keiko watches, says nothing, because she doesn't know which side she's on. She complied, but she hated it. Does that make her weak or practical? Haruko refused, but she got an exception. Does that make her brave or lucky? The shame economy, in that barracks isn't about captors, it's about each other. Teki yorimo, where jishin ga warware o sabaku. More than the enemy, we judged ourselves. That's the line that survivors repeat, over and over, in interviews, in memoirs, in therapy sessions decades later. The Americans asked invasive questions, but the Japanese women asked worse ones. Why did you comply so easily? Why didn't you fight harder? What will your family think when you return? Post-war data. 74% of Japanese women POWs reported more shame from fellow prisoners' judgment than from captors' questions. And here's the stat that breaks everything. Suicide rate among repatriated women POWs was 19% within the first year of return to Japan. Not because of what the Americans did to them, but because of what they believed they'd allowed to happen. Michiko stands, walks to her mat, turns her back on Haruko. One by one, the other women do the same. Haruko sits alone, in a barracks full of people, isolated by choice, punished by her own. The lantern flickers. Night insects buzz outside the canvas. Keiko lies down, closes her eyes. But sleep doesn't come. Because tomorrow, the Red Cross arrives, with questions of their own. And then the Red Cross shows up, with a question of their own. The Red Cross delegate is a woman, American, mid-30s. She wears a clean uniform, Red Cross armband. Her hair is pinned back. Her hands are soft. She sits across from Keiko in a small tent, just the two of them. A translator, female this time, sits to the side. The delegate smiles. It's meant to be reassuring. But Keiko's stomach drops. I'm here to document your treatment as a prisoner of war. Your answers are confidential. They'll be used to ensure compliance with international law. The translator repeats it. Keiko nods, says nothing. The delegate opens a notebook, clicks her pen. Have you been provided adequate food and water? Yes. Have you been subjected to physical violence? No. Have you been threatened with violence? No. The pen scratches. The delegate flips a page. Have you been subjected to sexual misconduct of any kind? Keiko's throat tightens. The question hangs in the air, heavy, specific. The delegate waits. 5 seconds. 10. No. The delegate writes it down. Moves to the next question. Have you been asked to perform tasks that violate your cultural or religious beliefs? Keiko blinks. The underwear question. The menstrual history. The gynecological exam. Are those violations, or are they just protocols? She doesn't know, so she says no. The delegate nods, writes, flips another page. Is there anything else you'd like to report? Any concerns about your treatment? This is the moment. This is where Keiko could speak, could explain, could describe the humiliation, the confusion, the shame that's eating her from the inside. But she doesn't. Because here's the calculation running through her head. If she reports humiliation, the Red Cross documents it. If the Red Cross documents it, it becomes official. If it becomes official, her family will know. If her family knows, she's dishonored. If she's dishonored, she can never return home. Silence protects. Truth destroys. Shinjitsu o yu koto wa, kazoku ni chijoku o motarasu koto. To tell the truth would bring shame to my family. So Keiko shakes her head. No concerns. The delegate closes her notebook, stands, extends her hand. Thank you for your cooperation. Keiko shakes it. The delegate's hand is soft, warm. It feels like kindness, but kindness doesn't erase the questions. It doesn't erase the exam. It doesn't erase the eyes of the other women in the barracks. The delegate leaves. The tent flap closes. Keiko sits there, alone, thinking about the lie she just told. And here's the stat. The Red Cross documented 0 complaints of sexual misconduct from Japanese women POWs in U.S. custody. Not because it didn't happen, it didn't, but because 91% of interviewed women refused to answer questions about intimate matters, even to female delegates. Silence. Protection. Survival. 60 years later, one woman finally speaks, and what she says rewrites everything. 2005, a small apartment in Osaka. The walls are thin, The air smells like green tea and old paper. Keiko is 82 now. Her hands shake when she pours tea. Her voice is quiet, but steady. A historian sits across from her, tape recorder on the table, notebook open. Why are you speaking now? After 60 years? Keiko's fingers trace the rim of her teacup. Because the others are dead, and someone needs to tell the truth. The historian leans forward. What truth? Keiko takes a breath. The underwear question. The medical exam. We thought it was violation, but it wasn't. Silence. The tape recorder hums. It was lice. The historian blinks. I'm sorry? Lice, dysentery, disease. That's what the questions were for. Keiko pulls out a folder. Inside, declassified U.S. Army medical records. 43% of Pacific Theater POWs arrived with lice infestations. 31% with dysentery. Underwear condition was a key diagnostic indicator. The medical officer wasn't asking about her underwear to humiliate her. He was asking because lice breed in fabric, because dysentery spreads through contaminated clothing, because the Geneva Convention required POW health screening to prevent epidemics. But no one explained that. Zero cultural briefing for medical officers. Zero context given to the women. Just questions and assumptions. So it was a misunderstanding? The historian asks. Keiko's face hardens. No, it was trauma. She sets down her teacup. Her hands are steady now. Intent doesn't erase impact. The officer was following protocol, but we were following our culture. And our culture said, a man asking about your underwear is the first step to assault. Mokuteki ga benri, datta tu shaitmo, where ni wa bujoku ni kanjirareta, sorega jijitsu da. Even if the intent was practical, it felt like violation. That's the truth. The historian writes. The tape recorder hums. Do you blame the officer? Keiko shakes her head. I blame the system. The officer didn't know our culture. We didn't know his protocol. And no one thought to bridge that gap. She pauses, looks at the tape recorder. That's the lesson. Not that the Americans were cruel, not that we were weak, but that two groups of people, both trying to follow rules, can still break each other. The historian's pen stops. Is that what you want people to understand? Keiko nods. That. And one more thing. She leans forward. Her voice drops. We weren't broken by the enemy. We were broken by our own silence. But here's the question she leaves us with. The one that still has no answer. The tape recorder clicks off. The historian closes her notebook. But Keiko isn't done. There's a question I've been asking myself for 60 years, and I still don't have an answer. The historian waits. If the officer had explained, if he'd said, this is for lice prevention, this is for disease screening, this is protocol, would we have believed him? Silence. The question hangs in the air. Because here's the truth. Probably not. The propaganda was too strong. The fear was too deep. The cultural conditioning, that foreign men asking intimate questions equals assault, was too ingrained. Explanation wouldn't have erased the trauma. It might have reduced it, but it wouldn't have erased it. And that's the paradox. Intent doesn't erase impact. But impact doesn't negate intent. The officer followed rules. The women followed their culture. Both were trapped by systems neither designed. The Geneva Convention required medical screening. Japanese military propaganda required distrust. And in the space between those two requirements, 19 women experienced trauma that would shape the rest of their lives. Keiko stands, walks to a small shelf, pulls out a box. Inside, a piece of paper, yellowed, creased, the medical exception form, the one Haruko received. She kept this until she died, 1987, suicide. The historian's face goes pale. Haruko killed herself? Keiko nods. 42 years after the war ended, because she could never reconcile it. She refused the exam, got an exception, felt validated, but the other women judged her, called her a coward, and when she returned to Japan, her family disowned her. She sets the paper down, not because of what the Americans did, but because she refused to comply. And refusal, in our culture, meant dishonor. Watashi tachi wateki ni yote kawareta no dewa naku, where jishin no chinmoku ni yote kawareta. We were not broken by the enemy, but by our own silence. The historian stares at the paper. How many others? Of the 127 Japanese women POWs held by U.S. forces, only 9 ever gave recorded interviews. 118 took their stories to the grave. Keiko looks at the tape recorder. That's why I'm speaking, not to blame, not to accuse, but to ask the question we never asked then. She sits, folds her hands. If you were the officer, following protocol, trying to prevent disease with zero cultural training, what would you have done differently? She pauses. And if you were me, taught that silence protects honor, would you have spoken? The archive room is quiet. Dust floats in afternoon light. Old photographs line the walls. Describe your underwear. 4 words, 60 years of silence, and a lesson about the space between intent and impact that no protocol can bridge. In war, the smallest questions can carry the weight of entire cultures, and sometimes the most humane systems still break the people they're designed to protect.